What's up? It's Mike Portnoy from Dream Theater, and my rock scene is a crazy, busy whirlwind of drumming, music, and playing. I was born in '67. In fact, I was born the day that the Beatles finished Sgt. Pepper, so it was a perfect synergy being passed from them into my life, and I grew up a rock fan from day one. My dad was a disc jockey for a rock station in California. So I grew up surrounded by the Beatles, the Who, the Stones, Zeppelin, Hendrix, the Doors. I mean, I was turned on to, classic rock from day one. And, I was the only 7-year-old kid with, 500 records and, buying all the rock magazines. So I was definitely a rock kid in the early 70s. And, throughout the 70s, I was into, Zeppelin and the Who were big for me. Pink Floyd, and then came Kiss, and Kiss was my biggest band, when I was a little kid. And I used to pick up all the magazines and just, I was in the Kiss Army, and, I saw them on the Love Gun tour in 1977 at Madison Square Garden, and that was like the concert that like changed my life, and I knew I wanted to be a musician, and I started playing drums, early on, but I got my first drum set in 1977, which was the same year I saw Kiss. It turned my life around. Dream Theater started in '85, and at the time when Dream Theater started, we were just a reaction to what was lacking in our favorite bands. We grew up listening to progressive rock bands like Rush and Yes and Genesis, who were in the '80s were doing pop, synthesizer, short song, radio hits. So we wanted to do the more prog technical side of those bands, but in the '80s we were also listening to metal bands that were coming around like Priest and Maiden, and obviously Sabbath had been around for many, many years at that point, and bands like Metallica were just coming around. So Dream Theater was formed as a kind of reaction to try to combine progressive music and metal music. But if I look back now, I gotta say I think the '80s might have been the worst period of music for rock in the history of rock. The '60s was awesome. The '70s was awesome in its own way. You had a little disco period, but for the most part, you had classic prog rock, and you had punk, and you had cool classic rock in the '70s. And then, the '90s was metal and alternative and grunge, but man, the '80s was pretty bad. At the time, the hair bands looked like it was, a sign of the times. But now, when you look back, if you watch like Metal Mania, whatever, on VH1 Classic, it's really embarrassing. And the metal bands were the whole hair glam scene, which now looks so dated. But then even, like I said, progressive rock was doing all synthy, radio-oriented stuff, and even like mainstream rock. It was the heyday of MTV. MTV was just coming around, so you had all like the Haircut 100s and Wall of Voodoo and Flock of Seagulls, and just this whole wave of new wave. And I guess at the time it seemed like it was just a natural progression of music, but now in retrospect, I think it was a pretty weak era for music. Thank God for bands like Metallica, Slayer, Anthrax, Megadeth, the whole thrash scene. As far as I'm concerned, the thrash scene and the metal world that came out of that was the saving grace of the '80s for me. A band like Dream Theater, which was not a hair metal band. We were, in fact, the complete polar opposite. We were about, like, the music and the musicianship and just fucking playing our asses off. That's what we were about. We weren't about an image. We were a total lack of image. In fact, we still are. We're still totally out of place. And our audience are musicians, and that's always going to be there. But in the '80s, we stuck out like a sore thumb. All these other bands that were playing the club scene on Long Island where we grew up. You had the Danger Dangers and all those type of bands that were really cashing in on that scene and doing well as part of that scene. And we were starting Dream Theater in that scene, but I felt a more kinship to the thrash scene that was going on at that time. You had the thrash scene and the glam scene, and my allegiance was definitely to the thrash world. Early '90s, it was '91, '92 before we finally felt some mainstream success, and I think that was because the industry was kind of, the whole grunge thing was coming in, and we were kind of an alternative to alternative, so I think that's why we did okay. In Future of rock, it's scary. I mean, some of the bands that are playing now, I mean, the bar of musicianship is going to all new levels. I mean, I think when Dream Theater started, people pointed to us like, wow, those guys are good musicians, you know, that, wow, look what they're doing. You know, it was kind of like doing what Rush was doing in the 70s. But now, I mean, what we do now, we feel like antique dinosaurs compared to what kids are doing today. You know, the music scene out there now, the drumming and the guitar playing. You go onto YouTube and there's like 10-year-old guitar players playing Yngwie stuff. And, you know, I just saw an 11-year-old girl drummer from, where was she from? From Indonesia. 11-year-old little girl playing Dream Theater songs, playing my drum parts. It's sick. It's absolutely scary, the level of musicianship of what's going on now. The bar just keeps rising and rising. Hey, what's up? It's Mike Portnoy from Dream Theater, hanging right here on rockscene.com, your place for all the coolest stuff that's going on in the rock scene.